Hey, good morning, folks. I'm Rob Chapman, EPRI's Chief Customer and Commercial Officer, and joining me on stage is Devram Sila. And let me ask you if anybody knows what a CFMO is.
Oh, God.
Be careful, keep it clean. Chief Flexibility and Marketing Officer for Kraken. And Devram, first and foremost, in addition to welcoming our audience here in New York, we want to welcome those that are online. We are streaming live right now, have a sizable crowd that's part of this event online. A little difficult to get to the US these days, especially if you're a global traveler, in terms of coming through some of our customs and things. So we appreciate those that have made the effort and are able to attend in person. We do want to welcome you to this event today. It's actually a monumental occasion for the Mercury Consortium. So Mercury Consortium was just conceived about 5 months ago in Manchester. The initial launch, December 5th, you and Arshad Mansour kicked off the concept, the vision of what the Mercury Consortium could achieve in terms of supporting the industry around especially consumer affordability. One of the things that came out of that December 5th meeting was about 39 founding members that said we buy into the vision of Mercury, we are supporters of it. And at that same time, they said, let's see what we can do while we work to incorporate Mercury as an independent company. Let's see what we can do in terms of developing some technical specifications around EV charging. So really, in 5 short months, we have been able to arrive at the first technical specification for EV chargers. That's going to be the panel that follows in just a moment to talk about some of the outcomes from that particular working group and some of the challenges, the opportunities they see going forward. But we also, during this period of time, were able to incorporate Mercury as an independent 501c3 company, or C6 company. Important in terms of being able to go out and actively solicit membership participation within the Mercury Consortium. So wanted to highlight these 2 events. And when I talk about the technical working group, I do want to note a couple things. One, when you look at what Mercury is attempting to do, it's never been done. It's a significant challenge bringing the OEMs, the technology providers or the energy service providers together, the utilities, and then ultimately being able to bring the regulatory policy constructs on board also. Significant challenge, recognizing that all of those folks have a different business model. But there's one common thread that connects them all, and that's a focus around the customer and the consumer. So when you think about what we are achieving from a Mercury perspective, yes, it's important from an OEM perspective, yes, important from a utility and a technology provider perspective, but it's most important from a consumer perspective. And Devram's going to talk about that in just a moment. The last thing I wanted to highlight was just the importance of flexibility. So when we think about flexibility, it's not just what Mercury is attempting to do, but flexibility from a utility perspective is incredibly important. Incredibly important in terms of supporting load growth. If I give you a data point here, US alone in the next 5 years are projecting about anywhere from 18 to 20% load growth. Data centers, reshoring of manufacturing, and electrification of end-use device level is contributing to that significant load growth. We haven't seen that since really the air conditioning days back in the late 50s, early 60s in terms of load growth for the electric utility industry of that level. In order to support that, utilities will have to make a significant level of capital investment. But one of the challenges that utilities have is they need to maximize asset utilization. Flexibility, taking advantage of these shared resources potentially, whether it be large load data centers or industrial manufacturing, or at the device level aggregated together, is going to play a key role in terms of supporting a utility's objective to support asset utilization, provide reliable, resilient power, and most importantly, or as importantly, to provide affordability for consumers. At the end of the day, this energy transition, if affordability is not met for all, including the low to moderate income community, which represents a significant fraction of energy users, then we're going to miss an opportunity. So keep that affordability in mind. Think about that from what utilities will benefit from, what Mercury Consortium can provide not only to the OEMs, the utilities, technology providers, but then ultimately the consumer in terms of affordability while still maintaining resiliency and reliability. So Devram, maybe give us a little bit of background in terms of Mercury. You launched it December 5th. It was an idea initiated by Kraken and conceptualized and then established by EPRI and Kraken working together with our 39 founding members. Say a little bit more about what drove you to the idea.
I'll start from a step before that. So my ambition in life has always been to have a title that I can explain to my grandmother. I've totally failed on that one. My marketing title is fairly straightforward. The flexibility one is because I'm responsible for Kraken's products that interface with the physical world. That's from consumer devices, EVs, heat pumps, batteries, to large-scale generation assets, solar, wind, batteries, but also monitoring the distribution grid. As part of this work, we try and integrate with everything that's out there. And Andy and I here have been trying to do this, and Serge, in our different careers for the past almost decade. And we have an extremely accomplished team of about 60 individuals, engineers in Manchester, who spend their whole life writing code to make these devices work. And it wasn't long ago that I asked our teams to say, if one of our clients, Jonadav, in the room, asked me, what do you have integrated? So I asked the team to give me an Excel spreadsheet with details of everything. And it was over 200 lines long. And it was because there are protocols out there, but there are lots of different ways of interpreting it. There's different versions of everything. So if the car is manufactured in Spain as opposed to Germany, it may communicate differently. So we realized, even though we kept on working, the backlog of work kept on growing. And if you look at the industrial change for consumer devices over the last decade, there's a proliferation of makes and models of everything. And if we don't control this, the cost, the consumer cost, is quite significant. If you think of the typical EV owner behavior, most people will go home at the same time. Most people who buy EVs first will probably work in similar jobs, live in similar areas. They'll all plug in their cars, and at that moment, you have a choice. You can either constantly keep upgrading the network and keep that utilization even lower, the asset utilization, because you're measuring for one peak in the day, or we get smarter about how to optimize those charging sessions so they're spread across the day. The same applies for heat pumps. Batteries, slightly different use case, but can provide incredible flexibility back to the grid if we can connect them and if they do what we think they should be doing in the first place. About 30 years ago, industry came together to address a similar problem. Led by Ericsson, a number of players said, we're all building these consumer technologies that one day will need to communicate with each other. And they said, let's compete on what we build, the qualities of that. Let's not compete across how things talk to each other and how they describe what they do to each other. And that's how Bluetooth was conceived. Just one idea, 5 players, industrial players coming together and saying, this is the new playing field. And it's been an incredible success. Actually, initially, it was horrible. I don't know if there are any engineers amongst you there, but I was trying to use Bluetooth to write code and do things in the late 90s. It was hard work. But today, when you buy a mobile phone and you want to buy a wireless headset, you don't really think about it. You go and buy whatever brand you want, because for as long as both devices have the Bluetooth icon, they just simply work. It's simple. Actually, I was in my hotel room last night trying to fall asleep, trying to watch dumb TV. I noticed even the TV had Bluetooth, and I can use my mobile phone as the remote control. So it's become ubiquitous. In fact, every single day, there are 10 million devices sold that have Bluetooth certification. There are over 33,000 members. I think what really excites me about this initiative is that if we can pull this through all together and unify what the utilities really want these devices to do, work with manufacturers to make sure that's clearly communicated and build a certification around that, we will unlock something quite important. And that's the simple metric that I always keep coming back to. Today, only 5% of devices that can support the grid actually do. Let's work together and reverse that statistic and make 95% of devices actually working with unison with the grid, and that's how you achieve a consumer-centric energy transition that's actually affordable.
Yeah, and I love that stat. Today we talk about there's about 10 million devices that are installed, whether it be an EV charger, whether it be a heat pump water heater, smart thermostat, et cetera. At the end of the day, that's expected to grow significantly, up to 200 million. One of the advantages of economy-wide decarbonization is the electrification of end use. Electricity becomes a fuel of choice going forward for many of other consumers out there. Now, from a consumer perspective, if I don't have the experience that I have with Bluetooth today, when I come home with a new headset or a new speaker set, that I can very quickly align that with the Bluetooth spec and have it work within my home, driven by my phone, then I am not most likely going to join programs. I think that's why we have such a low penetration today in terms of it. It's not only the penetration ultimately, but to drive adoption. If I am an OEM, I recognize that one of the value streams that a consumer can realize from buying my technology is if they're able then to participate in the energy markets and be able to provide some level of energy system services going forward. That's an additional value stream that they don't have today, by and large, if they're not taking advantage of it. So the importance of being able to focus on the consumer, even though that we, from a collaborative perspective, we have a different group of stakeholders that need to be at the table to drive this forward. Okay. And Deborah, maybe say a little bit from your perspective about the collaborative partners here. We have the OEMs, we have the utilities, we have the energy service providers or technology providers, and then regulatory policy. Just to give a little perspective.
It's a broad house. It's open for everyone. We were trying to use ChatGPT to say, how many people do you guys represent? And when we put the names of founding members and observers, we realized there's about 250 million households represented through that group of organizations. There's about close to 40 million devices that have already been sold by members of the Mercury consortium. The regulators actually was quite interesting, because when we first set it off, and I'll talk quite openly here, we announced the initial intention after actually the EPRI Summer Summit. Mm-hmm. That's where the whole initial idea started kicking off. And Greg Jackson, founder of Octopus Energy Group, at the event just said, we're building this. And suddenly people started noticing, so we started getting calls from regulators in the UK, European regulators, and we're saying, oh God, we must have hit a nerve here. We may be told to slow down. But actually the reaction was quite opposite. It was one of excitement, of saying, you guys together will run fast, and we'll love to see what comes and make sure any regulation we institute, any standards that we come up with actually fits with what you guys are building. So it was quite encouraging. But a little anecdote. So we often say 200 million devices by the end of this decade. That's a Bloomberg New Energy Finance number. But there was an article in The Economist last year called The Sun Machine. It was an essay, a long form. And it compared analyst forecasts to actuals for solar installations. And it was quite an interesting chart there that shows that on average, actual installations outbeat 5-year forecasts by 3 times. So if that's anything to go by, we're going to be somewhere between 200 to 600 million devices by the end of this decade.
Yeah, that's interesting. And not that I should use this name right now, but Elon Musk at a conference at Pacific Gas and Electric in Northern California, when he talked about electrification growth, actually said the utility industry is grossly underestimating what the electrification growth is going to be, once again reinforcing the importance of flexibility going forward. I do want to make a comment in terms of the 4 different players. One of the asks that we have of you and those that, of course, that are online on the live stream is ultimately we need your partnership. We need your participation in the Mercury Consortium. We incorporated May 1, where we can now actively pursue memberships. We do have the membership application and the pricing structure online that you could take advantage of and take a look at that. But I want to emphasize some of the questions that we have from folks is, why should I join today? Why not wait a little bit? And bottom line, if you're an OEM, a utility, a tech provider, or even the regulatory policy folks to participate, we need your voice at the table. If you're going to have an active role in helping to shape the future and the value that Mercury can bring to the industry broadly and to the consumer, we need that voice at the table. It can't be where you're an idle observer on the outside looking in. And in all honesty, it requires a commitment. It's a contact sport. You need to get in, roll up your sleeves, and be part of the technical working group. So I just want to advocate that as we think about what we're going to hear today, think about what your role, 1, flexibility within your company and the importance of it, 2, what Mercury is going to drive in terms of value proposition for you, in terms of supporting your decision to join or not to join. Deborah, I don't know if you want to say anything before we close and provide just an overview of what we're going to experience today. Anything you want to say in terms of joining Mercury?
I think we already have really exciting interests. Naturally, we build it together, so that leads to people joining. Look, the last note is we're at the start of something quite exciting. The energy transition for consumers is starting now. We're at the early days. So let's work together to make sure it's done right and that we all benefit from it, and so do the consumers. Thank you.
Yeah, and I love the vision part right there that Devin just said, grid ready by design. We're just at the beginning. Let's take advantage of being able to shape this vision and be able to take advantage of being prepared for what the opportunity might be around flexibility. So today we actually have 4 different panelists for you. First is going to be the technical working group. Daniel Brooks, who was EPRI's Senior VP of Energy Delivery and Customer Solutions, will actually moderate that particular session. Daniel will introduce the panelists when he comes up, but it's really focused on the outcome from the technical working group. We have our first technical specification, kind of lessons learned and opportunities for going forward. So you're going to be able to hear that in detail from Daniel and his panel. Second, we're going to go into a panel discussion with technology providers that are looking beyond EV charging. We'll have Daikin part of that panel, Mix Energy, and Serge Subran is going to lead that. Zaptec will also be part of that particular panel. And I do want to introduce Serge. Devram and I are co-chairs of the Mercury Consortium Board of Directors. Once again, incorporated as an independent company. Devram and I serve as co-chairs of the Board of Directors for Mercury Consortium. Serge is our interim CEO as we ramp up our membership and reach a level of participation where we will then vote on a Board of Directors going forward. But in the interim, we have a crew that is willing to step in and support it, and Serge, thank you for doing that. Third panel is going to focus on utility participation. What's the value proposition from a utility perspective? How important this is in terms of managing overall asset utilization and supporting consumer affordability going forward, especially with the large load growth out there. And then fourth, we'll close with a regulatory policy panel. Really, how can regulatory policy help shape Mercury Consortium and drive adoption of our testing, certification, and licensing standards? So with that, we want to go ahead. Devram, thank you.
Just one last point. If you guys want to do us out of a job as co-chairs, become members. So our commitment is we're going to be co-chairs until we get, is it 80?
75.
75 paying members, and then there'll be enough of a critical mass for us to step back and run elections to reconstitute the board of Mercury Consortium.
Yeah.
So please work hard.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful close, Devram. And so with that, let's go ahead and Devram, thank you.
Thank
and
you
I also want to thank Kraken for co-hosting,
Yep.
sponsoring this event. We're taking advantage of the particular space today, and so thank you for the opportunity to do that and the opportunity to meet in person. Thank you once again for those that are here in person, those that are streaming live. And Devram, let's have Daniel Brooks and his panel come on and talk about the technical working group. Thank you, folks.
Good morning and welcome to the symposium. As Rob and Devram have shared, Mercury is all about providing certainty for energy providers, for consumers to be able to know that devices that they would buy would have the ability, the capability to be able to be leveraged for providing energy services, provide the foundation for the future that we have for our energy as a society as we go forward. And that really comes down to, at some point, very detailed technical work, right? We have a saying inside of EPRI, ideas are easy, but execution is hard. And at some point, that vision has to get down to some very detailed technical work to basically define what are those functional requirements that are needed to allow those devices to be able to interact with the utility programs, with the markets that are out there. And that's what the work of the Mercury Technical Working Group has been all about. We started that work some time ago, actually January 15th. Rob said earlier that we've gotten to our first specification for an EV charger in 5 months. It's actually been 4 months and 16 days. I know that very detailed because it has been a really a very aggressive schedule. If any of you have ever been involved in detailed standards work to try to develop interoperability or other standards, IEEE, IEC, you know that they can take years to develop a standard. And in 4.5 months, we have pulled together a group of OEMs, energy providers, flexibility providers, whether that be the utilities or aggregators or whomever it may be, pull together those stakeholders into a technical working group to really define what are those functional requirements that are needed across jurisdictions around the world to be able to come to a draft specification that we're very happy to be able to share today is available on the Mercury website for getting input more broadly. So we're disseminating that to get additional input. That work has been really difficult. We've had weekly meetings of that technical working group with multiple subgroups. There's been 6 different subgroups that have been working. In between those weekly meetings, over 40 work group members representing 30 different companies coming together, all with very different perspectives commercially, different perspectives from a regulatory context, from a market context, but working together to build that foundation so that we had that functional spec that was needed. And so today, I think it was Devram that said in the early, we all think Bluetooth. Yeah, that's what it should be. It should be Bluetooth. It's magic, right? It just happens. Devram made the comment, and I appreciated it. He said, in the early days, it was pretty difficult. He was writing code, and it wasn't easy to get. The difficult that's been happening for Mercury has been happening in the technical working group for the last 4.5 months. And this panel is going to be a chance for us to sort of talk through what that has looked like. What have the challenges been? What have we seen in terms of really neat outcomes that have gotten us to the point that we're at? So in order to help me do that, 3 of the individuals who have been just completely invested in this as subgroup leads and leaders within that technical working group. I'm going to invite my 3 panelists up to the stage. And so if you all will just come on out, we will invite you one at a time. So first, Alan O'Donnell, who is the Global Head of Public Affairs for Easy. We'll go ahead and sit down. Alan, come on out. And then Brian Krotaz, who is the lead architect for EMS and demand response at Give Energy. And Dr. Andy Molyneux, who is the Director of Engineering and Integrations at Kraken. And I'll go just a little better than just that title and company, but what I want to do is give you all just a perspective to begin with for their companies. Why are they actually engaging? So to do that, I'm going to one by one let you guys talk about your company, why Mercury is important, but I'll give just a little bit more in terms of who you are so that they know who's talking to them. So Alan, in addition to being the global head of public affairs there at Easy, you're a proud electrical engineer at heart with a rich history in green technologies, starting your career in the 2000s with an installation company and then transitioning to Tesla Motor and Tesla Energy in the EMEA region during their formative years. You joined Easy in Norway in 2019, and now you're pivotal in their efforts there across Europe. Tell us about Easy, and why is Mercury important for Easy?
So at Easy, we've always believed in effortless electrification. Our first product was actually released in 2019, and it was designed to be easy to use, easy to install, and easy to service. And what that simplification of the product set was across the value chain, it resulted in exponential growth for our company, way beyond our dreams at that point in 2019. And it resulted in 900,000 devices connected to our cloud, making us one of the biggest players in Europe, if not the world, for connected devices along the way. Along that path, it's resulted in the company understanding that we're actually become an energy player, not just a hardware manufacturer. And we need to make sure the benefit of what we're doing goes across the consumer, not just the value chain from the top down, from the bottom up as well. How can the consumer benefit from what we're doing here? Yeah.
Oh, great. Brian Krotaz mentioned that Brian's the lead architect of EMS and demand response at Give Energy. Brian spent 30 years transitioning the broadcast and retail industries to digital and then to the cloud. In 2024, Brian saw the light, as he puts it, and now leads the work on interoperability and high-speed APIs, handling tens of thousands of events per second at Give Energy. He's been a passionate leader within the Mercury Technical Working Group, delivering high-quality, interoperable, and highly secure distributed grid of the future as part of that. Brian, tell us a little bit about Give Energy and what you all from Give Energy see, why Mercury is important to the future of Flex as we go forward.
So Give Energy is a battery, inverter, and EV charging business. We're bootstrapped, no external investment. Everything's done in-house. We don't outsource anything. We have our wholly owned factory in China, and all our software development's done in the UK. And we're moving batteries forward. We're looking to integrate with the rest of the industry. We don't just want to be a little island of give energy specific software. So one of my biggest roles is integration and interoperability across the industry. We're working with UK government to look at legislation on interoperability and, most importantly for us, grid security. And we can see that in the future, we need to get these devices on the grid to be able to run a green grid, to be able to get rid of fossil fuels completely. And to do that, we're going to have millions of devices connected. And we see that the best way to do that is to use the existing grid connections and put a battery and solar into, ideally in the future, every building in the world. And that requires that we have the ability to take any vendor's device and connect it to any grid service, any energy provider. And that's why we've joined Mercury. We're a founding member. We're a founding member of TEIA as well for grid security, and we're working on tariff interoperability. And my role encompasses all of that to get to a point where a consumer can just, as you said earlier with Bluetooth, plug a device in and it will just work.
Great. Dr. Andy Molyneux, Director of Engineering and Integrations at Kraken. Andy was one of the co-founders of Upside Energy, a flexibility startup that was acquired by Kraken in 2020. Since then, Andy, you've been active in the grid flex space for over a decade. Devin mentioned that earlier. You guys pulling away at this for a long time. Your role spans all forms of energy flexibility across the energy system. At one end of the spectrum, connecting the fleets of EVs and domestic appliances, all the way to the other end of large wind farms and battery scale systems. Kraken, we heard from Devram a little bit, but tell us about Kraken and why Kraken sees Mercury as the way forward.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you. Devram did steal my thunder, so I'll keep it quite light on the Kraken side, but we think of ourselves as the operating system for a utility. So a range of functionalities that allows a utility to offer CRM, billing, apps for their consumers, but also access to flexibility. So this is integrations to your heat pump, to your home battery, to your EV, but it's also integrations to large-scale wind farms, large-scale battery farms. And this is a global play as well, so it's functionality that would allow a vertically integrated utility in the US to function and give their users benefit, but also in the UK as well, where it's more regulated and there has to be different ways in which we can interact with the assets. On a Mercury perspective, it's all about the integration. We look after a team, like Devram said, of about 50, 60 people who are constantly working on different styles of integrations. We've got around about 2 gigawatts on our platform of domestic flexibility. So we've got, give or take, 2 nuclear power plants worth of domestic flex there. Wow. And there's a lot of work involved in that right now. There's new API changes, even standards that exist out there. Every time we integrate, we find different ways it was interpreted, and all it really means is it's slowing down this journey, and there's so much flexibility there that we just can't access, that's just locked away. This is why Mercury is really important to us.
Awesome. Well, I want to get into some of the details of the working group. So I mentioned earlier that developing standards, particularly interoperability standards, it's meticulous work. I mean, the vision is great, but there's a lot of details, and you're getting down to talking about specific communication signals that are sent for every individual function that is required, and so it requires detail, and those processes can take years. I was personally involved in IEEE 1547, the original version of that, and it took 3 years almost to get to an actual standard, and you all have been personally invested in Mercury so far. I mentioned the number of meetings that we've been having. All 3 of these gentlemen have been leading subgroups. I know that you've put in many, many hours into it. I'm curious, we've gotten a draft spec for our first technology out in a little over 4 months. What are you most proud of just in terms of that personal effort and your company's effort that you've put into it? Maybe just start with you, Alan.
I think I mentioned the consumer at the heart of everything we do as a company. And I think I'm most proud of the fact that we actually started with the consumer when it came to Mercury.
Yeah.
So today we'll talk a lot about the power grid and the different players that are balancing power in this world around us today. But the fact that we looked at the use cases, like what is the best for the consumer, and we started from that point.
Yeah, that was the beginning.
The very beginning of it, so I'm proud that that's where it started as opposed to from the power grid down to look at it. And I think it will remain a big part of everything that we're doing moving forward. And a real highlight maybe throughout it, of course there was disagreements across the path, and there was compromises to be made along the way. And by being able to zoom out of that disagreement and think, why are we doing this and who is it for? That common goal sometimes diffused or made alignment and much more easier to achieve. And like you quite rightly said, the short time frame that's been upon us.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. So just some inside baseball for you all. The very first meeting on January 15th, I had our EPRI team come into that meeting with a proposed set of minimum functional requirements, as well as communication protocols that we might leverage, put those on the screen, and immediately the work group said, whoa, 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 whoa. We can't start there. We got to start with the actual use cases for the consumer, and got us reoriented. I was trying to short circuit because I knew how fast we had to get it done. But it was consumer oriented from the very beginning, and so that's a great point. Brian, what about you? Anything specific that you really say, yeah, I really take pride in that?
I think one of the biggest things for me with Mercury is it spans the entire industry top to bottom. OEMs don't talk to energy traders. Energy traders don't talk to the software developers that are building these protocols. And for the first time, we've all got round the table, was it 55 companies initially? And what we found was we're all using different words for the same thing. And one of our biggest problems up front, we thought they were disagreements. It was just that we used the same word to mean diametrically opposite things. And over that 4 months, we've all come to understand each other so much better. And we understand the capabilities of the OEMs. They're delivering things that trading is not taking advantage of. And traders would like to do things that the OEMs would love to know to build into their products. So it's given us that insight right the way across the industry that means that over the next couple of years, we're going to be able to build a better grid.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see how, in some cases, competitors, in other cases, different players within the different segments that are required, have been able to come together, sometimes speaking different languages, not really communicating and connecting on points, but having a forum and a place that's sort of safe to come in to be able to have those conversations and to get to right. Yeah, that's been useful as well. What about you, Andy? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think I'll build on Brian's point, and it's around what we've done in, let's use the word, the OEM, the hardware space, where the mechanics, the actual things that you're interacting with are really complicated, and there's so many factors that need to be taken into account. And then if we go and look at the markets globally, and by markets we mean your EV, what can you do legally, participantly, even economically within different areas? It's a very, very complicated space. And I think distilling that into something that allowed us to have these conversations and say, the minimum viable would be this globally, the minimum viable would be this in the UK, in Europe, allowed us to really have that just foundation where we're not looking at very specific use cases, we're looking at general flexibility here and how it can be, the barriers can be lowered so we can participate. I think that was really useful.
Yeah. I want to sort of switch the conversation just a bit to, we say that Mercury is all about building that confidence for both energy providers, for consumers, for all the players that might be providing flex. That essentially means that we, in the technical working group, have had to think about how do individual devices interact with the grid? How do they interact with the programs that utilities provide or markets to be able to do that? And I'm just curious, and maybe I'll start with you, Brian, because I know you were a part of the subgroup that was looking at that, but how has Mercury and the technical working group started to try to make sure that those capabilities do exist to be able to provide the different ancillary service or energy functions or capacity functions that might be needed?
Well, first of all, give a shout out to Nella, who did a fantastic job surveying nearly 3,000 energy markets across the world, all continents. And we were able to see that essentially electricity is electricity. It works this way. You know, you've got to balance supply and demand in real time. And the way that's done is broadly the same across the world. There are capacity markets working days and hours ahead. There are first-tier and second-tier flex markets that are dealing with sub-second, 2 or 3 second, and then 5 to 30 second look-aheads. And what that enabled us to do was to match that to the capabilities of different energy devices. So obviously batteries and inverters can change their output really quickly. Heat pumps, white goods, EV chargers are slightly slower to majorly slower than that. Even looking down at where an EV might take a long time to start charging, but once it's charging, we can get fast response out of it. So matching those two up has taken us probably the longest part, and the reason that we had to delay through that was the complexity of matching those devices onto those markets. But I think we now understand in detail, and we have data that will be published as to where those markets are, what the opportunities are for Flex amongst those, and how those devices can be matched onto those requirements.
Yeah, and I noticed that you referred beyond just EV chargers there, right? So that work that has been done for the EV charging spec, that work provides a foundation for whatever the additional devices are that will be coming, right?
Yeah, the market requires turn up, turn down services. How that's delivered by a device, we're going to cover in the roadmap for Mercury of how that will map onto other types of device.
Maybe just to come in there, Brian, on it as well. This is a starting point, what we've achieved here, and we had to strike the balance between being aspirational and what's feasible today. And that was a balance we constantly had to revert back to do it, so just to build that one.
Yeah, absolutely the case. Andy, anything to add to that? Or?
No, I think it's, you've hit the nail on the head around this at one point we were describing the amorphous blob of flexibility and what that looks like. And just trying to find something achievable. I think as well, it's worth calling out the balance we had as well with what exists out in the market and what the aspirational future is. Like we all know flexibility needs to be better. We need to look at how the future is going to look, what's 2030's requirements. But in the UK alone, there's 1 million charge points that if we made the spec far too detailed, we would leave a lot of those out. And that's locked in flexibility. So I think we struck a really good balance there on presenting a roadmap for the future, but allowing assets to participate today.
Yeah, it's not been easy to find that balance, and we'll continue to learn as we go forward and continue to look to where those innovations need to come into the specifications. So Andy, I want to maybe pick up from you there. There are a lot of communication protocols for device-specific or even broad categories of devices that exist. What's the difference in what we've put out so far from the working group as a draft functional specification for EV chargers and what already exists in terms of communication protocols and standards work that have gone on before?
I'll give you a really good example that I think describes the difference here between the protocol and the functional protocol. So I have an EV, I come home at 5 p.m., I plug in. What's the first thing that it should do? Should it start charging and then ask if it's got a schedule? Should it wait to charge and have a look, see if the schedule exists? That doesn't exist right now. There is no formal specification for that. And what we've done is we've rationalized that based on consumers, what the assets should be doing, and what the markets require of it. I think we all agree a short spike in power whilst it goes and requests the specification isn't the right thing to do. So we've started to specify those functional behaviors. Another one is how the device would fail safe if there's loss of internet. Mine's at the end of my garden, my Wi-Fi is not great. It's quite common in the morning. I would wake up and it lost internet overnight. The worst possible scenario is you wake up and your car isn't charged. We start losing consumer confidence there. So what we've done is we've laid those groundworks out based on the consumer and built on top of that. I think that's really what sets us apart here and makes this a much more holistic functional spec.
Yeah, coming back to that use case that Alan, you sort of laid out in the beginning there. It's not all been butterflies and roses, right, in the working group. There's been a lot of difficult discussions, a lot of iterations back and forth. Anytime that you're bringing together this sort of diverse group of stakeholders that have different commercial, regulatory, market, jurisdictional types of perspectives that are there, they're going to be challenges. I'm curious, give us a sense of some of the challenges that you've seen and how we've overcome those and how those basically provide for a foundation for being able to move even more efficiently and faster in the coming devices. And maybe just start with you, Alan.
Yeah, maybe Rob captured it at the beginning in his opening line there. If this was easy, it would have already been achieved by now. And it proved to be as difficult as we expected it to be to do it along the way. I think on building something Andy mentioned there as well, what we're doing here is it's not creating or stopping innovation in the protocols that are going on around the world today. It's really focused on that functionality layer, and it was to help us surge, especially bringing us back into the functionality layer of why we're here and why we're doing this, and constantly bringing back to the reason that we first started, was the one that was able to solve misalignment, disagreements, and sometimes unconscious bias, natural unconscious bias, because of the segment that you're working in for yourself.
And I think a large part of this is down to scoping, that we are looking at demand response. So if we look at the mapping to OCPP, we're not interested in the charging for the monetary side of charging for that EV charge session. But we're also not saying you can't also do that. So what we're saying is this is the minimum part of OCPP in this first release that you must use. And this is how you deliver that functional spec that Andy talked about through OCPP. But that doesn't prevent you from then using the rest of OCPP to also run the rest of the business. And we looked initially at some of the EU work on mapping the industry of all the different companies that come together to make the grid work, and all the different relationships between them, the technical relationships and the contractual relationships. And I think the biggest part of this was narrowing our focus down to we only care about that bit. The rest of it is out of scope. We're not affecting it. We're not constraining it. And what we're saying is that piece is this is how you do it. This is the one way you do it. So we as an OEM can say we only have to write that code once. And then our device can be adopted into any flex provider because they only have to write the code once.
Yeah, and maybe just pull the thread on that just a little bit. As an OEM or as a technology provider working with many different entities, the cost for you to have to interact in different markets, regionally, globally, with different devices that have different requirements and protocols, to be able to design devices or to be able to design programs to be able to interact with the grid, that becomes much more costly when it's that one-to-many kind of relationship, right?
Well, if you look in the US, a software developer is, $250,000 a year. And if it takes a couple of months to develop the integration, but that's not a fixed point. You haven't finished at that point because that specification is going to be moving every few months, and there's more work to do every single year to keep those up to date. And essentially, software is not something you write, it's something you look after for your entire life. It never stops. And what we're doing is narrowing down that space and saying, rather than having to do a new integration with every company you work with, instead, let's all do the same integration.
Andy?
No, absolutely. And yeah, that is an existing challenge right now. We often describe it as like an accordion where the market is growing. We're seeing assets, new companies arrive daily onto the market. So we're expanding, but unfortunately, we're not seeing a contraction of the specifications right now. So it is, if left unguided, it's going to get worse. And this is where Mercury really plays into this to get some coherence, get some standards, and get some functional ways in which we can actually control these things.
Do you have another comment?
Yeah, maybe I could give a real-world example here of what we're talking about. As an OEM, we have over 500 integrations as it is today, and as a small company in the beginning, growing fast, to do 541 different integrations over the past 5 years is very time-consuming and resource. When we talk about expansion as an OEM as well, and something that should be attractive to other OEMs to join the work that we're doing here at Mercury, when we talk about regional growth, regional is not just going from Europe to the US or Europe to Asia. Regional can be cross-country within the EU, where we have to develop our integrations and our standards to suit the different power grids in each region. So what we're doing here will really help OEMs in if they want to achieve exponential growth across regions in the future.
Yeah, let me interject there as well. An example of this, if this doesn't go right, if we don't get hold of this now, what we're already seeing in the UK is if you bought a new EV, it may dictate what energy company you go with in order to get the right tariff. And that is not a world any of us set out to do. And this isn't through malice. This isn't secret dealings with car companies and energy companies. It's down to the integrations having not taken place yet. So you might argue stupidity for the software developers, but I would just say they didn't get it under their backlog yet. And what it really means is yeah, that market is not helping the consumer. And what we need to do is standardize this to lower that barrier to entry so that you buy your car and the energy companies that can offer these really attractive tariffs, the type of use, the type of device tariffs, they can very easily access that car, that manufacturer, and safely know they don't need to put the edge cases in per device and, start benefiting the consumer.
Yeah. And I would compare this to McDonald's only taking Visa and Burger King only taking Amex. You suddenly get a world where you can only use half the services. And as that proliferation grows, it gets worse and worse.
Yeah. And make it easy for us to understand that, Brian. So it's a key enabler to not only having the provision of that key resource that is going to be needed going forward. At EPRI, we're constantly interacting with different stakeholders and utilities, and Rob said it earlier. One thing that's absolutely clear is that electricity is going to be key to the energy future that we want as a society as we go forward. And the only way to get there with the resources that are coming available, flexibility, and particularly flexibility from the end use, is going to have to be that low-hanging fruit that we leverage in order to be able to do that. And so it's absolutely critical that we make that easy for both the energy providers, for the customers, and the cost for everyone goes up, and for the OEMs and the technology providers. So I appreciate those answers. We spent a lot of time talking about EVSE, talking about electric vehicle chargers and the first draft spec there. And even it's a draft spec, right? So we've got a spec that we're putting out for dissemination so that we can get input and from others. That implies that there's additional work that's going on. In fact, we're late for a work group. No, the work group meeting was suspended for today, but we start back next Wednesday on our next work group meeting. Is there a road? How has this effort with the EV charger and the spec on there, how has that sort of helped us to lay out a roadmap for what comes next with the EV charger, but also what comes after that? So, Alan, maybe start with you.
Yeah, and the selection of the EVSE, just to go back to the very start of Mercury as well, it was via a voting system. So the original founding members, the people who first bought into where this is going, we had a vote and we decided on what should we focus on first, and there was one clear winner, and that was EVSE. So we started with EVSE. So I think that's very clear to point out that it wasn't specifically chosen in the beginning. It was voted for amongst all the contributors. When we started with the EVSE, looking at the other technologies that will follow, I just use this opportunity to speak to anyone that may watch this, listen to this, or read anything that follows today. Is we need help for the other technologies, for EVSEs. We have market-leading experts that contributed towards EVSE. And as we move to the next technologies, battery, solar inverters, smart thermostats, wherever it may go next, we need these people, we need the subject matter experts. So joining Mercury at this point is not only about becoming a member, it's about contributing to shape how the next devices may follow the EVSE V1.
And I realize as I'm even asking the question that there's some of that we want to sort of wrap up the discussion with. I want to just pause a second, put you guys on the spot. You've been spectators to this point, but do you have questions? You're looking at folks that have been on the inside of these technical working groups. One or two of you in the audience have been as well, but would love to get your questions about what has happened inside of that detailed work that has gone on, and give you some perspective on what it would look like if you or your company would want to engage, and how you would be able to influence what I think is going to be a critical part of our energy future as we go forward. So I gave you just a few minutes there to get a thought or question in your mind, but any questions in the room or online? Yeah, question right here on the front row. We got a mic so people online can hear.
I have many questions. Okay. Who is your customer?
Who is the customer for Mercury? You're talking about for the Mercury Consortium? Yeah. Who's the customer for the Mercury Consortium? Yeah.
Take part in this. At Kraken, we have a really interesting time defining customers. So ours is technically utility, and we provide the functionality across the board. I think when looking at this, customer is a really interesting word that it implies sales, where I think the main value we're delivering is for the manufacturers, the OEM. There will be implementation guides, there'll be functional specs, there'll be testing procedures for their hardware. and also for we're going to use the word aggregator here, and globally, that's anyone who is managing an asset for flexibility services. So that could be a VPP provider, that could just be a utility who's doing it in-house themselves, and they'll have the same sets of tools. So it'll be the functional specs, the guides, the implementations to allow them to go from zero to a working VPP, a working aggregation. On top of that, I think as well, we probably have some work around helping the industry bodies, so the people who are looking at the next set of specifications for energy market services. I wouldn't say that any of these people are necessarily customers. They're all incredibly interested parties who we're going to help facilitate and drive this energy future.
Yeah.
The other customer, of course, is the consumer. The reason we have a Mercury logo is so that logo will be on the box, and the consumer knows if it has that logo, it is going to work. And one thing we haven't really covered so far today, one of the big things in Mercury is that if you implement the protocol, you test that if I tell the box to do something, it sends me a message back saying it did it. It never tested, did it actually do it? So what we're doing in Mercury is defining test specs for the hardware to make sure that when you tell it to turn down, it actually does turn down in the timing that we have specified in the Mercury spec. So the consumer will now be able to see that logo and know that they can sign that device up to an energy service. They can probably earn money from doing that, and they're guaranteed it will work.
Yeah. Alan, any expansion of who the audience for Mercury is?
I think the forefront of the coming weeks, if we want to not look at the long term and look at the short term, is definitely the OEMs like ourselves, to get the OEM engagement and traction amongst OEMs. So if you're looking for the immediate impact, I think the immediate answer in the short term would be to build on the OEMs that have already contributed, to move forward with them. So I would say that's the short term.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Andy, across the three, so we had the OEMs, we had the utilities, the aggregators, the technology providers, but the consumer. I think all of those are the intended beneficiary of what comes out of Mercury. All will benefit from having the specifications that ensure that devices are able to interact in the grid to provide those services, to provide that flexible resource that's needed to move society forward. We all will benefit from that. Question?
Howdy. I was wondering if you guys have any thoughts on the consumer considerations for flexibility services being controlled by the EVSE versus by the car directly, by the EV itself.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's been a lot of discussion of that inside the technical working group. Who wants to jump in first? And we don't want to reveal all of our skeletons here.
Yeah, this will be like the Beatles breaking up again. But no, it's a really interesting thing, and we're agnostic to what we're connecting to. The reason we chose EVSE is when you look at it globally, it's an easier thing to start with. So we can kind of almost flex our muscles, learn how to do this with the EVSE. When we start thinking about the EV, there's quite a few more constraints that come into place. You know, the battery drives away quite often, which for some of the regulators globally, like the DNOs in the UK have a very hard time with the battery that walks away. But it is 100% on the roadmap and in our consideration.
Yeah, maybe there's some other great organisations and movements around the world just now working with the OEMs to look at things such as plug and charge and to have a lot more accessibility to the vehicles onboard data itself. So I think we should leave elements like that to some of the other great organisations that are working on it today as well.
The other thing we've done to simplify Mercury in the short term is we've said that in the 0.9a version of it, the protocol must be implemented on the device itself. So we're not including systems that go via cloud, we're not including systems that go via HEMS, but they are on the roadmap for the next phase. So EVs are a classic case where you have to get to the EV via the VOEM cloud. And we will embrace them, but to keep it simple, as we said, we've said in this first version, because of the testability requirement, it's much easier to test a device in a lab if you've physically got it on your desk. If you have to include the OEM cloud into that, the test specification becomes harder. And that's the piece that we're going to work on in the next phase of the roadmap.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, so I love the panel. A standard is Nirvana. I'm Maria Kretzing from a tech provider, Bidgely. But one risk I see is when I looked at the partners in the consortium, which is probably why you're asking for more OEMs, the major providers of EV charging in the US, so I'm going to be a little North American focused, aren't represented. Yeah. And so have you thought about how to de-risk them not participating? And do you also have some percentage, required to achieve the network effect that you've thought about?
Yeah, great question. I'll jump in and then you guys can clean up. So we have been thinking the other way, which not how do we de-risk the fact that we don't have them, but what are we going to do to ensure that they are part of the consortium? So that's really been our focus. And the December 5th launch event that Devram and my CEO, Arshad Mansour at EPRI, they got up, they launched this, and I don't know if it came from Devram or I don't know if it came from Arshad, but somebody said, by March 1, we're going to have the first functional specification, and I was sitting there watching it streamed online, and I thought, what? By March 1st, we're going to have there's no way to get that done in a timeline. I say that to say this. In a perfect world, we would have had an engagement period before we actually started the development to make sure that we had all of the players that we wanted and needed to be a part of it. We sort of started running and then tried to pull people in as we went. We have to do that. It's not just North America. We don't have really good representation from Asia either. We want all of those regions represented well. And so our intent and focus isn't to try to de-risk based on not having folks, but to try to bring those folks in. Now that we have a publicly disseminated draft that still will have revision to it as we go forward. Other thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I think it was a consistent tone, to be honest. You correctly identified it was a consistent tone on a weekly basis. How can we drive more engagement from different geographical regions throughout it? So it wasn't through the lack of effort or overlooking it. There was a craving from all of us to get that engagement from the different regions. But you're correct in saying a lot of the engagement, especially for the EVSEs, came from Europe in the beginning. And that's fair.
And we did find that in every meeting, we were driving all the members that were in the meeting to say, go and find your contact list, get them to come and join Mercury. It's not something we've created a closed house. Very much the opposite. We've been trying to bring people into it, and we've seen many, many more members join every week as we've gone through the process. I think as you talk about the network effect, I think it's much more that if you compare to using Mercury as opposed to not using Mercury and having this wild west of all these different protocols, all these different ways of doing things, we as an OEM say that Mercury is easier to build with, it's cheaper to build a product, and it results in a better product. So why, as an OEM, why would we not join it? And I think a lot of it is just that people haven't heard of Mercury yet. It's been percolating out there. The people that have heard about it have come and joined. And this event and the dissemination events that we'll be running in the future are all about bringing more members in so we hear their voices.
Anything to add?
No, just the roadmap. Although we're talking about new assets, it continues for EVSE as well. So yeah, I expect a lot of outreach and engagement now to kind of to build this out. Yeah, this is a big global play, and the more people involved, there is this bootstrapping problem to get to a nice network effect, but we don't see it as an issue. Yeah, it's going to take a bit of work.
Yeah, two final points there. One, we want everyone to be a Mercury Consortium member, but we do have the ability to have observers to participate. And so if folks are unsure, we would welcome you in as an observer to work in the technical working group to help support, which we believe will expose you to why you would want to be a member once you get there. And the second thing is, part of putting out the draft specification is sort of a chicken and an egg, right? Some people are saying, well, why would I want to invest you're saying it's hard work. Why would I want to invest that hard time and that work if I don't know exactly what's coming from it? And so we now have some proof in the pudding of what can come from this as we get everyone involved. And so we hope that you'll see that as we, the QR code's up. You're probably getting it on your phones right now. And you can start to see what comes out of the working group as we go forward. Other questions? Yeah.
Hey, Justin Hill, Southern Company. It's a question around, so I've been in the space 12, 13, 14 years or so, and this is the third, fourth, fifth time something like this has tried to happen. So there's been a lot of initiatives inside EPRI, outside of EPRI or just the industry in general trying to say we will come to a standard, we will all implement it, and we'll have the grid services. So if this is down the road, what differentiates the Mercury consortium to say this one's going to work, this one's going to stick, versus the ones that have tried and had great ambitions and just kind of failed along the way?
Yeah. I could maybe take it. I share your pain. I've been in the industry a very similar time to yourself, so I share the pain. I know exactly where you're coming from, and I've seen it time and time again, geographically as well as globally, how to do it. I think we've created a common neutral ground. I've not experienced a time where we're not having conversations on a transactional level, we're having it in a more open, debatable discussion level. That could be even with speaking to people in the same sector as you, people in different layers. I don't think that's been done before in my time, in the similar time to the industry as yours, that the common neutrality where you can have these open discussions and we all have to compromise and we all have to find that common goals. That's the difference for me.
I think the other difference is that in the past, those discussions have been around, let's make 2030.5 the protocol for everybody. And it's a great fit for some devices, and it's a really bad fit for other devices. So OCPP is a fantastic fit for EVSEs. It would be a terrible fit for heat pumps. What we're doing in Mercury is saying, here's the functional spec. We have initially mapped that onto OCPP. We've not modified OCPP. We've just said, you would deliver that function by using this feature of OCPP, and you will use it in this way. And when you send that command, this is what the device should do. What we're going to do in the future is then embrace other protocols. So if you're a heat pump vendor, you might choose OpenADR, or we might embrace 2030.5. There's no restriction in our minds as to how many protocols we would embrace. It should be a small number. It shouldn't be 20. What we're then saying is that each OEM can pick a protocol to work on their device. They only have to do it once. And then a flex provider has to implement all 2, 3, 4 protocols. Then any device can connect to that flex provider. But we can find the protocol that best maps to that type of device and the sorts of things it can do. I think that's probably the biggest difference between what we're doing now and what's been done in the past.
Andy?
Yeah, only the word that both said there is the foundational work. So it's as close as we can get to academic on here's how the current markets will function, here is how the current assets best function, break that down and build on top of that. So we have proof points, so that there's very little opinion here, and it's not an academic exercise once we did the functional part. This is something that people can pick up and will be easy, quotes, to implement on both sides. So we now do outreach. We're going to go to the manufacturers, we're going to go to the utilities and say, let's build this. And I think back to the kind of Microsoft days where it will be outreach and actually going and helping the implementation, so giving them the functional things they need to get going here. And I think that's where other ones have failed, in that perhaps there was more opinionated elements of the protocols where you would implement it, you would then turn to your partner who's implemented it, and they've implemented something completely different because of interpretation. We've got rid of that. And we've also lowered a lot of the friction points. I think of a new OEM starting up. I'm going to make the cheapest, coolest looking EV charger. Why would I bother? You know, I've got a lot of things to go and focus on. I'll just do my own custom protocol to the cloud. I think what we're doing is providing them a really low barrier to entry here so that they can get going easily, quickly, and know if they sign up to this, here is the people who it will support. Here is the ability to go to 12 different energy providers in the UK or the energy provider you've got in the US. That will function there. I think that's the little niche that makes this work.
Yeah, and to be clear, this is not a new protocol. I think other people maybe failed by to try and create a completely new protocol and standard to try and change what was there. I was amazed. I thought there might be 8 global protocols, and I think I discovered 34 from the list of different protocols and different movements, some doing really well, some doing not so well. I couldn't believe there was that many different angles and different protocols that are going, so we're not creating a new protocol or a new standard to move away or take away from some of the good work that other organizations are doing. We're actually complementing some of the other organizations and looking to harmonize them with the functionality layer that we've created.
Yeah. So,
I think there's one other point on that a lot of other vertical integration attempts, they've said, here's how you run your business. This is a CPMS. This is a utility. What we're saying is, here's how you communicate the message, why you communicate it, when you communicate it, how you make money from that, not our business. So any business model can be supported using the work that Mercury's done. We're making no assumptions about how those two companies work together.
Yeah.
Me and Brian wouldn't be sitting here today, I think, if it was going to control business models to do it. So.
Yeah, the approach of focusing on the functional requirements, leveraging the protocols that make sense to do that, I believe that's a key differentiator. But I think your question has another angle to it as well. You said, well, why would this one be successful? There's the approach, and we believe in that approach. We believe that differentiates what has come before. But there's also just a very heightened motivation. I mean, this is absolutely required now. I don't know that in the past, globally, there has been the awareness of, if we don't figure this out, we are about to cost so much more to build the energy infrastructure that we need than otherwise we would. This is an opportunity to come together to achieve that energy future that we want with all the objectives, but in the most affordable way, because it has to be affordable. And this, it's the right time for the right approach, I believe. Get the mic so people online can hear. Yeah, thank you.
I agree. From my perspective, it seems like the timing and also the push from the OEM side rather than utilities trying to force it down, kind of the opposite direction seems to be the key benefits that I'm seeing, at least initially.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we have a question from the live stream. Paul asks, will this new specification be widened to DNOs managing local grids?
Say it one more time. Will it be widened?
Widened to DNOs managing local grids.
Yeah.
I can take that point. Yeah. The short answer is yes, it is capable for that. There are regulatory reasons why that can be difficult. So, for example, if we take in the UK, where, so as Kraken, one of our customers, so a utility, for sake, we'll call them Utility X, if they are managing the EVSE, there has to be one single point that does the overall management and brings everything together. But what they're fundamentally bringing together is signals. That could be price, that could be green energy, and that could well be DSO, so the middle layer of voltage. And my view is absolutely, we need all of these signals. The energy system is going to look fundamentally different in 5 years, and then the next 5 years, and the next 5 years. And it's around how we take in those signals and stack rank them. We're already seeing constraint issues with DNOs, but they're using a lot of older systems, so they're requiring wires to the house so that they can turn things up and down. This is a much more holistic way of doing it. And yeah, maybe it's not as accurate. We can't have 1 secondly readings and a response to the house that is via a wire. But what instead you've got is a huge amount of assets that can be steered already. So yes, in short, it is absolutely capable for that. What you have to do is break apart the use cases and look at the individual kind of constructs. And that's quite a global problem.
And that regulatory construct differs globally as well, right?
Yeah. So it keeps me in a job.
Any other comment on that? Yeah.
Hi, Lauren Kastner from ICF. This is building on Justin's question. I'm curious if you can speak more about how you may or may not be coordinating with some of the other industry standard organizations. And, you know, EBRI is certainly a trusted partner here. Maybe you can say more about sort of the longevity and long-term stewardship of the standards and relationships with testing laboratories as well, and you know where it sits in the broader suite of standards that all of the partners will have to navigate in the long term.
Yeah, so I'll start there and you guys jump in as you see fit. So we are intending to coordinate with everyone that we can bring in. So we're not developing a new standard. We're developing a functional specification and then a test spec that will come from that based on the requirements for the individual devices that we put out. But we're not developing a new communications protocol, whether it be OCPP or whether it be IEEE 2030.5 or whatever it may be. We're not looking, but we do want those experts that are involved with that to inform what we are doing inside of our specifications that we're developing. And the test laboratories, we're looking to develop those long-term relationships with those test laboratories to be certification labs for Mercury. So we're looking to engage with all of those. It's intended to be an open, collaborative effort to bring them all in.
Yeah, I can maybe go in a much deeper maybe level, the more technical level than the overall arching goal of it. If you're looking for a direct answer, we have had observers from the IEC, IEEE, CSA, OCA, Matter, OpenADR. There's been engagement, there's been observers, there's been one-to-ones, and our doors have been completely open to join any calls. We've had physical meetings, we've had video meetings. So just to list some of the organizations that have been communicated and openly engaged by us throughout the process at various times of the evening, I should say, as well for me.
And test labs, DECRA, DNV, others that we've engaged already as well?
Yeah, a number of test houses have been involved just to try and help us along the way as well, because we need these to understand what's coming next for us in the testing houses. So the testing houses have been engaged as well, for sure.
And we as members of Mercury, we've joined CSA, we've joined the OpenADR Alliance, we've joined TEA. So we're acting as a bridge into those other organizations. And we are absolutely not trying to compete with any of them. We're trying to bring it all together and say, rather than picking one of those pools, let's say how you would use all of them to be interoperable.
This gentleman has one. So these two questions, and then we'll have to wrap up. Yeah, please.
Yeah, hello. To you, you were mentioning TEA as another one. Could you outline the differences between Mercury and TEA?
So TEA is essentially it's trust for the energy internet. It's not a communication protocol. It is how you trust that the device or the company you are talking to is who they say they are. And it's how you set up that security relationship in the first place. Now, it's not part of Mercury. It is a suggestion for the future of Mercury. And in fact, one of the things we're doing as part of the next phase of Mercury is setting up a separate security working group to look at how we secure the grid of the future. At the moment, if we look at OCPP, it's using TLS. So the data is encrypted along the path. But how do we guarantee that that device is what it says it is? It's not the FSB, for example, setting up 1 million fake devices feeding fake data into our grids. That would be disastrous. So we have to build more secure grids in the future. What we have is great, but we could do better. And what we're looking at in the security group is how could we be better without costing the Earth and without stopping devices of the present being available to the grid. We were looking to that in a very quick meeting, and we found very quickly there are a lot of edge cases, there are a lot of results from making those decisions that we need to go and consider. So TEA is on that list for consideration, but it's no more than that at this stage.
Last question.
Thank you very much. It really is quite simple, I think, maybe even answering the question why this hadn't happened earlier. If you think about 30 years ago, when we're looking at blackouts and things like this, the creation of EPRI and some of these things, you've become bankers, which is ideally what this whole system needs, to be able to regulate, to be able to understand and how to supply some of these. And making it economical as well, because even the sine wave of the Mercury itself indicates that there's a decoupling going on, and without an economic decoupling, it was very difficult to sustain any type of a system. So what I wanted to do is commend you for at least establishing that, but then also focusing in on your role as a banker, perhaps, that really understands where the energy is going to go and where it's going to be coming from. The technology is great, so something like this is wonderful that you can talk about the technology part of it, but the bridging gap, the benefit that you were mentioning, comes from understanding what the original purpose of even EPRI was, which was to make it an economic reason to drive people to consume in a certain way, certain times of the year, perhaps, or whatever that might be. But I want to try to commend you by saying you're like bankers to me, the way I see, who your consumers are.
Thank you for the comment. We need to have some banking hours as part of our TWG golfing instead of doing the work group stuff.
10 till
No, I
3,
appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
It has been hard work. We've got 3 minutes left. I do want to be able to sort of wrap up and give you all a chance. It has been hard work. You all have put a lot of, I've seen, there's been over, just so you know, there's been over 2,500 person hours of time that has gone into the work group. I don't know how much of those are allotted to you, but I know that it's been a lot. Why would anyone that would be sitting in the audience or that's following us online, from your perspective, why would they want to engage knowing how much of an investment it is? And I'll just start with you, Alan.
Yeah, we're at the start, so it's a real chance to not just become a member, but shape the way this is going to move forward. And I think I made a cry earlier for the other technologies where we're going to move to next. So I'll make that cry again. The other technologies first and foremost. I think the cybersecurity question, of course, we need more engagement there. We need more subject matter experts in the security group that's been created to do it. This is a real chance to not to react to what's coming. There's a chance to actually be part of where this is going.
Brian?
We as a company looked at this and said, should we be part of it or come in later on when it's been finished? And what we didn't want to do was have it go in a direction that wouldn't support what we want to do. And it's an opportunity for OEMs particularly to come in and say, well, what you're planning wouldn't work for us because. And they don't need to put in the 2,500 hours to work out how to fix that problem. But at least if they can alert us to there is a particular way of doing things in Japan, for example, that we're not aware of, that we need to embrace. That's the value that those OEMs could get by making Mercury support their use cases and alerting us that we need to do more work. And we're happy to go and do that work. What we need is those advisors to come on board. It'd be great if they come and do the same amount of work as us, but they don't actually need to. They can just be there, sticking their hand up and saying, there's a problem, as long as we can then go and fix it.
Yeah. Andy?
Yeah, I think we're all here today because we all fundamentally care about the drive to net zero. In the UK, like a big one for us is the decarbonisation of heat. We have somewhere in the region of 30 million gas boilers to swap over to electric sources. That's going to be about 600,000 a year to 2050 to hit net zero. We started with EVSEs, but I think what that identifies is every one of us has our own little microcosm of problems within this space. We want to allow this to have a modern technology kind of solution where we are allowed to kind of broaden the spec a little bit, look at the IoT and what that offers us. So my call is you all have your own decarbonisation problems. Join us and allow us to come and work on these together so that we can standardize this. We can remove some of the niches that don't allow this widespread flexibility and get broad acceptance across the board.
Yeah, great answers. I'll just, my 30 seconds at the end to close us out. We need you. That's the big message. We need you in the technical working group. We need you with the QR code and the draft specs. We've gotten to a milestone, but we're not close to finished even with the EV charger, and we're wanting to start to parallelize and start to move to other technologies as well. We need you to give us input based on what we've provided today and is published on the website, but we need you and your company to engage. If you're interested, I would encourage you, please do reach out through the website that you go to on the QR code, or just an email simply to myself, Rob. We'll make sure that we get you engaged in the work group. Thank you for your time. Let's give these guys a hand. Okay, and we're at break for how long? 20 minutes. 20-minute break. We'll reconvene here.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah.
Symposium is about to resume. Please take your seats.
All right, folks, we want to go ahead and begin to take our seats. We have another exciting panel that we want to make sure that we maximize the time to include your question and answer. So let me just summarize a couple key points that I heard out of this morning's discussion. One is, I think it's very clear to everyone around the importance of flexibility for the energy system, for society at large going forward. So we've identified the need and why this plays such an important role in terms of supporting affordability. It improves utility asset utilization. Ultimately, affordability, reliability, resiliency at the consumer is a key driver. Second, I think that we talked a little bit about risk-reward. There's a significant risk by staying on the sidelines right now, recognizing the level of flexibility growth that's expected within the industry. A Brattle study several years ago actually looked at about 60 gigawatts of flexibility in North America today, talking about 200 gigawatts of flexibility potential in 2030. That's pretty short in terms of being able to leverage that. So the risk reward of jumping in now and being part of the Mercury Consortium to help drive this going forward, very important from our perspective. The third area that I think that really came out in this last panel was this notion that it's a heavy lift. It really is a full contact sport. We need players at the table actually participating. And some will say, but why? Why should I be there? Why not just wait? I'll apply it once it's available for me to apply. And I think one of the keys that comes out of that is this notion that, hey, a consumer ultimately holds the keys here. The consumer either, and actually not either, the consumer needs to adopt to begin with the technologies. And then second, the consumer needs to be willing to participate in any sort of energy services, grid services programs that might be available. And hey, from a consumer's perspective, it's enabling choice for them. They're able to manage their energy cost and their energy looking forward, and that's a key part of their affordability. So the consumer has value also. But a key owner of that consumer are those folks that are developing the OEMs, or excuse me, the technologies, whether it be a heat pump, an EV charger, smart thermostat, et cetera. Those folks really need to take an active role in terms of participating in the Mercury Consortium. This next panel is intended to talk a little bit more about the technology companies, whether it be heat pump, Daikin, whether it be EV charging, Zaptec, or whether it be heat pump water heaters, Mixergy, that will talk about that. The intent is realizing how important the OEMs are in terms of this consortium going forward and the link that they have to the consumer at the end of the day. Serge Subran, who I mentioned earlier, is actually our interim CEO of the Mercury Consortium. Serge will be moderating this panel, so please join me in welcoming Serge.
Thanks a lot for the introduction, Rob. Can I also introduce Pete?
Hello.
Peter from Mix Energy. We also have two distinguished members joining remotely. Paul of Zaptec, also based in the UK, but basically representing what I think has been named the largest selling EV company, EV manufacturer in Europe by Delta E last year. So congrats for the prize of #1, Paul. And Paul is basically also bringing a lot of expertise on EV charging, but we're going to be focusing on vehicle to grid as chargers and cars work together to create, in a form, a new class of asset. And basically, Patrick, also joining from a company that I don't think we need presenting anymore, Daikin. Patrick is the Deputy General Manager of the research entity in Brussels, covering Europe for heating systems. So welcome to all of you. Obviously, we're going to be talking about other type of assets this morning. We had a first roundtable or panel discussion on EV charging, as that was the first technology or class of assets that our members wanted to cover. And we're going to be talking about something else, even if Paul is talking also about EV charging, but this time probably more about discharging than charging itself with EVs. And I will start by you, Peter, maybe because you broke one of the certainties I had about thermal storage, as you're obviously a pioneer in inventing a new generation of water storage that is grid-ready, responsive, natively integrated in grid balancing services, which is quite impressive because I thought that hot water tanks were slow, that there was limited flexibility capability, and you're totally transforming this previous reality into water becoming a new generation of battery, in effect. Could you maybe present that a bit more?
Sure. So a traditional hot water tank is basically like a big dumb kettle which heats all or nothing irrespective of how much is needed. And it's slow. It takes many hours to get to a useful temperature. So what we do at Mixergy is we're a technology business that adds sensing and some software capabilities. And we also exploit the physics of stratification within a hot water tank so that you only need to heat what you need and you accurately know how much energy is in the tank at any one point in time. This creates a huge amount of headroom so that each tank, of which there are 120 million throughout the US, representing way over 200 gigawatts of dispatchable grid flexibility and a terawatt hour of energy storage, these tanks now become meaningful, responsive assets to the grid. Each one's about the size of a Tesla Powerwall in terms of the amount of kilowatt hours per home. And by leveraging the insights from the sensing And by choreographing many thousands of them at once with the software platform, we're able to unlock a lot of flexibility to accommodate more renewables on the system.
So one question for you again, Pete. Why Mercury? What do you expect out of Mercury? Why you basically decided to join?
Yeah, so so I heard a couple of references to music references, which I'll draw. One was the Beatles, and someone mentioned Nirvana. I don't know how many people in the room like 80s music, Depeche Mode, Van Halen. The reason I'm mentioning that is one thing they have in common, apart from big hairstyles, is synthesizers. So electronic music instruments in the 80s, they weren't interoperable. So you had all of this potential, and then a few pioneering players like Moog and Korg decided to create the MIDI standard. And I think what Mercury is going to be to the energy system is similar to what MIDI was to the music industry. It just unleashed a flourishing of creativity in the case of music. And I think in the case of the energy system, Mercury is going to give a seamless platform through which we can all work with different services. And so, for instance, in our case, it means that we don't have to worry about which home energy management system we're working with, which utility we're working with. We can go into any market. And across all these different opportunities, we're using the same protocols, the same underlying principles that are quite well established. And Mercury is built upon emerging standards that have done a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the thinking about how you make this happen at scale.
Maybe I'll hand over to Paul to present both Zaptec and a bit also the reason why you decided to join Mercury very early on. I must say that we met in Germany probably 3 months ago at a vehicle-to-grid conference, and you immediately said, let's go for it. And since then, you've been an active member of the technology working group. Maybe you can present Zaptec and the relevance.
Yeah, that's right, Serge. Yeah, we met at a vehicle-to-grid conference where you introduced Mercury to us. And yes, our reaction was, we need to be part of this. Zaptec make EV charge points, like the one behind me. These things deliver energy currently, and in the future they will deliver energy in 2 directions. So quite a simple device, all told. And we can make, the most perfect charge point that does this. But unless that charge point can become part of the energy system, our customers are really missing out. I mean, at the moment, people plug in, they extract energy from the energy system, they charge their car, they pay their energy to the energy supplier. These charge points are capable of being flexible. They are already capable of playing in flexibility markets and getting this energy at fantastically low prices, or in some cases being paid to consume the energy. You can do this now. But the number of our customers that actually do this currently is very small. Most of our customers are missing out on this fantastic opportunity to be part of the grid. And the reason they're not defaulting to being part of the grid is because it's complicated. Every utility is different, every country is different. There are lots of standards. Unless you're a real technical and energy geek, this is not available to you. And Mercury's vision of making this available to everyone, simply, and importantly for us, globally, that was really interesting to us, because at the moment, we need to unlock the value that's delivered by these charge points, and Mercury seems like a real great way to do that.
Let me ask Patrick, to take over. Basically, you're also building the next generation of decarbonization of heating. I don't know if we really need to introduce Daikin, but I will let you do that in a few minutes. Maybe you can explain both what your company is doing in this space and what is the relevance of Mercury for you guys.
Yeah, okay. So thank you for the introduction, Serge. And yeah, Daikin is it's a global player. We're 95% in HVAC. Predominantly heat pumps, all kinds of heat pumps, water to water, air to water, air to air, whatever. And then specifically in Europe, we're since 2007, 2008 actually in air-to-water heat pumps, especially replacing boilers with heat pumps. And it's no surprise that heat pumps are more expensive than boilers. So one of the crucial parts is to make them run more efficiently. So at the end of the month, the end user is paying less for its energy than he's currently doing. And a key point there is to use the flexibility of the heat pumps. And as was said before, heat pumps can provide a heat storage device, which is way cheaper than an electric battery. And that's, I think, where we come in. And then the whole point starts indeed how to do that. As was said before, it is possible, but it's difficult. And a thing like Mercury is then potentially one of the ways or a great initiative actually to across the board, across the industries, across the sectors, make something where the end users in an easy way can get access to this flexibility and thus take advantage of the lower energy prices when it's available. And on the other hand, for an industry like ourselves, the whole point of making this possible via a uniform way of working or a standardized way of working is indeed also making this technology then more affordable, which is another way of being able to roll out these things more easily to customers.
And I may ask each of you, actually, what are your expectations in terms of device-level functionality? If you take hot water tank, heat pumps, EV charging, but more in the vehicle-to-grid sense of it. We talked about the functionality standardization work that we've done with EVSE. We didn't pick the EVSE. We started with EV charging as the first space that we want to invest in. And we start within EV charging with EVSE. And within EVSE, we start with V1G or unidirectional assets. Because indeed, we thought that that was the simplest one, the most regulated, standardized world we could find out there. You're starting to enter now on hot water tanks with unique solutions. Heat pumps also trying to move towards a massive electrification in Europe. And V2G coming in Europe big time, even if we expect something like 30% of the cars who are going to be in the road in 10 years from now to be bidirectional, so introducing a different relationship between EV drivers and the energy space, again. So if you look at the functionality layer that we're trying to standardize, what typically you would expect us to work on for your different classes of assets, and what impact that will make to you and the industry?
Sure, I can go if that helps. So, yeah, so if we take the use case of a hot water storage with a heat pump, you can think of it at different levels, layers of functionality. So at the device level, you have grid services. So every system that we deploy measures locally the frequency and the voltage so that we can provide network constraint services and frequency response services for a transmission system operator, for instance, at a local level, autonomously. Then if you go up a layer, with the state of charge sensing, we learn the behavior and the demand profile over time. And then we integrate that with price signals from flexibility provider. We also integrate it with weather forecast. Because if you take a heat pump heating a hot water cylinder or a heat pump water heater, there's an interesting trade-off that emerges, because the price of electricity is often not correlated with the temperature outside. Early in the morning, it's usually colder, but often in many markets, the electricity price is lower early in the morning. But the heat pump will run at a lower COP because it's colder. Whereas in the afternoon, it's appreciably warmer, you get a better COP. So if you have software that can factor in weather, price, you can, from one day to the next, make a determination when's the best time to heat, depending upon prevailing temperatures and price and demand. What that nets off to, in our case, where we've been doing field trials, is easily 20–30% drop in the running costs for the end householder. And then if you go up a further level, you can absorb some of the biggest surpluses that arise. In the case of the UK, we spent over £1 billion curtailing wind when there's too much wind on the system. Preceding year, that was £500 million. It's projected to go to 4 or 5 billion in the future. if you can unlock the flexibility within each tank, you can absorb those big surpluses that would otherwise. So why pay wind farms to shut down when you can pay homes to heat tanks, to charge electric cars, to run their heat pumps?
And we had a discussion just before starting the panel. I'm coming more from the e-mobility industry than the hot water tanks or the rest of the appliances in the home. And I was interested to hear that at the end of the day, it's also about consumer services first. You have to deliver a heat level, whatever it takes, and then you play with the balance in different markets. As we're going to apply the same rules, starting from use cases from consumer point of view, how do you think Mercury should start working on your asset classes? What is the angle to look at basically the functionality layer that we're trying to standardize?
Yeah, so with respect to the consumer, what's cool is Mercury is building on existing standards. Like, for example, in the UK, it's incorporating some of the features of PAS 1878 and 1879. Now, within those standards, there are provisions around consumer opt-in and opt-out. And also, with respect to energy smart appliances, that also goes into things like a hot water tank having a sense and presenting its state of charge, so that a consumer knows that they are not going to run out of hot water. They're not making a trade-off between heat versus price. There's always a sort of baseline level that they can rely upon, and we're just liberating the flexibility beyond that within the capacity of the product.
And Patrick, with your heat pumps, you have a similar approach. You are looking at consumer flexibility in a different way that meets energy?
Yeah, it's similar, but additionally to that, we can play around with the temperature set points in the house or in the apartment, whatever you have, because also there we know that from experience and from studies, if you lower set points by 1 or 2 degrees, on the one hand side, you save an awful lot of energy, and then you can gain a lot when it's actually needed. So this playing around with set points can be a huge flexibility in when you use energy and when you don't. Combine that, indeed, as Peter was saying, with playing around with the set points on the tanks and potentially increasing the set point on the tank when it's appropriate from an energy perspective point of view. I think that's where the two actually can combine brilliantly.
And you believe that's the kind of focus that we need to have on heat pumps for the standardization of this functional layer?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, it's indeed more about making sure we can modify the set points whenever it's suitable, needed, whenever you want to do that. We know the end user comfort level is not that much influenced by that, because you can sense actually by when you would need to boost it again in order to be able not to have the comfort level reduction. So I think those are rather simple control mechanisms that can relatively easily be incorporated without going very, very, very highly technical and starting to fiddle around, I would say, with the level of the inverter control and things like that. I don't think even you need to go to that if you can, on a relatively simple way, manage the set point control either on the room thermostats or the room settings or on the tank settings. I think you can get away with most of the things already quite there. No?
I would imagine that the challenge, we had the challenge in the previous work or the ongoing on EVSE, which was to imagine the normative behavior of a car to have a normative behavior of a charger. Yeah. Do you think we're going to have normative behaviors of the homes so that we can fit the specs of what we need to deliver at the device level that you guys are basically selling around the world, or that's going to be a superior challenge than the one we face with EVs?
Well, I could speak to our experience in the UK, where we have been able to, through the data that we've obtained to date, plugging into not just the hot water demand, but the space heating demand and some of the trials that we've been doing in social housing and new build, there are very clear archetypes of customer, which then you can map across to amounts of flex So an analogy is that there are also archetype electricity demand profiles. And I think what we're going to start seeing is those archetypes being applied to flex headroom depending upon different customer segments. So it's really a matter of data, and it's a matter of collating that to the point where we've got enough statistical certainty across a large enough fleet that we can have a reliable, dependable source of flexibility for an aggregator, system operator, or utility.
Patrick, you also believe in archetypes?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. Plus, I think what is important from an end user point of view, especially at the beginning, and in some countries this is more sensitive than in other, I think, is the fact that you always need to give the possibility for the customer to overrule. Especially like in Germany, this is a crucial one. The sheer fact that they can overrule will make them buy in. Not that they will actually do that, but it's the principle that they can do this. And because in most of the cases, people just want to run the things automatically, and as long as they feel and they have the impression they can overrule and they are in control, I think that's a crucial part of it, and I think we can do that.
I'd be interested to get Patrick's perspective, because our learning from the UK market, I don't know if it's similar to Germany, is that typically people are engaged for the first couple of weeks when you give them a really nice user interface for their heat pump, and then very quickly the interest just asymptotically vanishes to nothing. As long as everything works, they're quite happy for a lot of flexibility to go on behind the scenes. It's what we've
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's what is currently the most difficult part, that this whole integration part isn't there, and that's what people are actually then, you only have let's say the technical geeks that will interfere with it for the time being, but you don't get the broad audience. And the whole point of this is that we can make it feasible, attractive for the broad audience, that they are not technical geeks, they just want things to run. Just like they are used to run currently today with the boilers. Nobody knows even what boiler they have in the backyard. It's just there. They only notice it when it doesn't work. And we need to get that type of level as well with the heat pumps. And then the integration part of that is what will make this work. That's the whole point of it. Yeah.
So we'll have to work on the handshake between the heat pumps, water storage, and the houses archetypes that we have out there. And that's going to be quite a challenge to do that at a global level, because I imagine that archetypes can vary a lot by continent or by region. So that's going to be another fun work for another working group to try to define this. We had that debate in the EVSE space with the handshake between the car and the charger. Now, if you look at vehicle to X, not only grid, but X, the car and the charger become a pair of devices that work together to produce charging, discharging systems. How do you look at this element? Do you think that we're going to be capable of standardizing the handshake, or how are we going to look at the EVSE and the car together, bearing in mind that they are carried by different OEMs with different strategies and at times probably different engagement vis-à-vis Mercury? How do you look at that, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, conceptually, the EV problem is quite simple. It's just start time, stop time, turn up, turn down. Those are the only control signals that we need. So controlling the charge point is in theory quite simple. The challenge, and you touched on it there, is not only are there lots of different archetypes, but certainly in the EV world, what we've seen from charging behavior is that not only is every driver and every user unique, but every charging session is unique. How much energy you need in the in the vehicle in time for your next journey varies. It varies every day, and that is the information that you need to be able to plan the charging session. It's probably worth mentioning, because we touched on the value proposition. Why would you even bother doing this? Why not just charge when you want? And what we found in the EV world is that the amount of energy that you need to put in the car versus how much you could deliver through the charge point is very different. The vehicle is plugged in for typically 10 hours or more. You could supply 70 kilowatt hours or more during that time, but almost nobody, and it's a very small percentage actually use that, pull that much in each charging session. It's usually around 10, 15 kilowatt hours in a window of where you could deliver 70. So if you choose when and how quickly to deliver the energy that the user needs, the savings are not, we're not talking 5% or 10%. The savings that drivers in the UK already achieve by allowing this to be scheduled, about 60 or 70% saving. It's significant. And so there is a really good reason for people to want to sign up to these flexibility services. As you mentioned, though, the complexity is, well, how do I flex it when your charging session is unique? At the moment, you need to tell the system how much range you need for the next day so that it can be scheduled and when you need it for. So I want 80% battery, by 7 a.m. tomorrow, and then the energy company can work out the cheapest way to do that. But what is coming is standards. The ISO 15118 standard, which is part of the vehicle to grid standard, allows us to get that information directly from the vehicle. So you don't even need to press anything in an app or apply any information. The vehicle can say, I would like to be charged to 80%, please, by this time. And the system works it out. So the goal here is that you don't have to use an app. You don't have to push any buttons. You don't have to program anything. You just plug in, and you will get the optimum charging experience at the lowest price if that's what you want. And that will be integrated with your home, with the local energy system, with the upstream energy system, and the transmission grid as well. Everybody gets to benefit, and you as the user get rewarded in the form of lower prices. So that's the vision here. The standards are out there for the charger to vehicle protocol. This is ISO 15118, which is coming. But what is missing is so how do you do this in a normal consumer environment? There's lots of technical standards out there which we can implement, but the functional specification of, so exactly how is this going to work then? This is the gap that's filled by Mercury. We don't need more technical standards. We've got enough of those, thank you very much. But what we do need are functional specifications that explain how this is going to work in a customer-friendly way that we can implement in a ideally a globally standard way so that everybody knows what to expect, and we don't have all these regional variations which just lead to confusion and extra costs for customers as well. So we know that the business case is there. We know that the technical standards are coming, and Mercury is filling this hole of, well, okay, how's it going to work then?
Sure. And we're indeed lucky in the vehicle to X space to have one global standard finally that is imposing itself. I think it's going to be widely adopted across regions with 1511-20 and whatever version will come afterwards. But do you guys have the same kind of stable standards environment at the protocol or the communication level that we can then use to build the functional specs upon?
Well, I think it's quite nascent I think EV chargers are quite different from, say, heat pumps and HVAC systems in general. What happened in the EV space was that they seemed to quite quickly coalesce around a common standard with OCCP, and they seem to all quickly get themselves harmonized at that level. And now it's about flexibility, and there's these emerging protocols, and Mercury is going to bring all this together so that it's globally deployable. But I mean, interested to get Patrick's view from Dakin's perspective, but my sense of the HVAC sector is that it's been much more fragmented. There's been much more of a proprietary land grab where there's a bit of a fight, frankly, for the customer interface. So you know, my product, I want to have the customer relationship, but then that breaks down when you have, say, solar PV, which you know, needs to be triaged between, do I use the surplus solar PV to charge the car, run the heat pump for heating, or heat the water heater? And when you have disparate systems, all, you know, the inverter wanting to have its app and its own customer relationship, and it becomes quite difficult to unlock that flexibility. Whereas contrasting that with EV chargers, I think that it's not got that knotty integration issue or this sort of legacy of proprietary controls trying to own the end relationship. To that extent, I don't think.
I will let
Yeah, I would tend to
Patrick.
agree with that one. Historically, I think the HVAC sector was indeed developing their own controls one by one, brand by brand, and then gradually going into what you could call centralized controls, and then gradually going into home energy management systems, and everything is a little bit scattered. I would tend to agree with that, unfortunately. Now, I think there are initiatives to try and standardize. We have EE-Bus coming up. We have the Code of Conduct in Europe coming up. So there are initiatives there, and although it's early and it's not yet very widespread, I would think that the time now of Mercury stepping into that and indeed trying to sort of like group a couple of these things together would actually be able to accelerate this integration. So I think from my point of view, from our point of view, that's exactly why we wanted to get involved early, to exactly be able to work on that. I think we have a number of integrations already through open APIs with various utilities, but that's again the one-to-one thing and the one-by-one approach. I think what we are now trying to do is to indeed have something that is more globally available potentially, but at least regionally available, so it becomes more affordable as well from a development point of view at our side. And that means then finally for the end user it becomes more affordable as well, and especially more quickly and more reliable and more easy to integrate. I think I can only agree with what was said before. The whole point is that the end user, they don't have to be bothered with our internal technical issues. They just want things to work, and that's what we need to get to.
Yeah, and you touched on a really key issue there about optimizing across the different sectors. Yeah, okay, we've got the standards in the EV world, but we're not able to integrate easily with solar, with heat pumps, and to take our rightful place in the energy system. Either we try and be in control, which isn't going to work because we're not the grid, or we need a standard way to speak to all the other devices that we might need to trade off the charging session with. It was mentioned before that having one single standard to rule them all, where we all speak the same protocol, that's not going to happen because the needs of each device is very different. And so this idea of bringing it together at a functional layer so that the heat pump people can use whatever protocol works for them and the FC people can use what we've already got, but then come together as our device is connected to the grid, your device is connected to the grid. We're all gateways to the grid. And then we're able to work in harmony and not fight for ownership of the experience, which I don't think is going to work. We're an EV charging company, not an energy company. We can't own this space and we can't do it on our own. It's impossible. And I'm sure others in their sector would feel the same way. So this is an opportunity to come together with sectors that we don't operate in, but then work in a way that really meets the customer's needs. And it's that cross-sector bit that's really exciting. I know we haven't got there yet because we've only done the EVSI bit, but it's this objective of Mercury that really got us interested.
And if we try to go beyond this siloization of the IoT world and standardize at the functional level, you believe that we're going to be bringing back to the consumer additional value to operate at scale globally and make sure that those devices are natively integrable in energy or grid balancing services?
Absolutely. I think it only takes a few big players to move and adopt Mercury, and then I strongly believe that everyone will be brought in their wake because it will just become a no-brainer, and then you're unlocking economies of scale, and it will just become business as usual. And the timing couldn't be better given where we are with respect to the penetration of renewables, the need to absorb the surpluses of energy, the need to unlock grid flexibility and deal with constraints that are holding back new build developments, that are holding back heat pump retrofits. We're at a sort of tipping point where something needs to unlock this, and I think Mercury could very much do that. And then bringing that back to the end customer, it's going to be about maintaining a relatively simple relationship with their products, except their running costs simply drop by, in some instances, 20, 30% or more.
Paul?
on the consumer side, how do you look at the value of Mercury for the consumer? Assuming that we achieve our goals and we define a standard functional level that is agnostic from protocols and the business models, because everything has to be possible. How do you look at the impact of Mercury down to the consumer?
Well, certainly unlocking those lower energy prices is key. The charge points are charge points. They cost what they cost. There is a lot of products out there, all doing something very similar. The costs of charging your vehicle annually compared to the price of a charge point is significant. The cost of use is much higher than the price of a charge point. If we can't deliver easy access to those energy savings, why would someone buy our charge points? So for us, unlocking that value is key. The running costs dominate here, not the price of the charge point. As I said before, only a small proportion of our customers are currently accessing those savings because of the difficulty in accessing them. So this vision of 95%, Devrin mentioned it earlier on, and I thought this was a really good target, that just by default, out of the box, you unbox one of our chargers and you've already got access to these significantly lower energy costs. To say that the savings on the EV side are really big, 60-70%. If you go to vehicle to grid, which is coming, those prices fall at the moment by 100%. We are seeing free charging options already emerge in the market, where basically if your installation is vehicle to grid capable, you know what? Your charging costs, which are several £100 or dollars or euros a year, you know what? You can have that for free. Now that's a pretty compelling offer, and that is the value of selling this flexibility back to the market. I suspect that, I'm an energy guy. I've been in this industry for 30 years. I know what the value is of flexibility. I don't think customers really know this yet. I think when they see what the value is of flexibility, particularly with vehicle to grid, there's going to be no stopping it. And you did touch on, we're only just at the start here. Why would you not want, effectively free or, a fraction of the price for your mobility? People will drive a significant distance right now to save a few cents or pence on a litre of diesel. We're not talking a few pence here. We're talking significant savings. And it's not just for the customer or the consumer. Those savings go back into the energy grid and reduce the cost for everyone. So even if you're not a driver, or if you're not using a heat pump, it lowers the energy price for everyone and the car and the CO2 footprint. It's sort of what's not to like with this picture. I'm really excited about this, but if I evangelize about this possibility, your average customer is going to say, well, that's all very well, Paul, but how on earth can I access this? And that's where it comes apart right now. We can do this. We know that the benefits are there. The challenge is to unlock it for everybody. And that's the opportunity here.
Patrick?
Yeah, I can only echo on that. I mean, the whole point is indeed the energy pricing is a crucial part of making this work. In Europe, in most of the countries, actually, we have a quite unfortunate situation that the gas price is much more cheaper than the electricity price. In UK, it's about times 3.5 or times 4. Where I'm sitting in Belgium, it's more than 4, which actually means that running a heat pump is more expensive than running a gas boiler. And that's going to take years for the legislators to do something about that, because it's about taxing and it's about income for the state, etc., etc., etc. So that's going to take a while. However, if we can unlock flexible working, that can be done straight away, and it hasn't got any impact on taxation and whatsoever, because that's already available. The whole point is just how to make this work and how to make this happen for the end users. And that's, I think, what we are discussing about. The whole point is the technology is there. We just have to integrate things a hell of a lot better so that for the end user, the average end user, I would say, it becomes doable. And that's the whole point where it's not today. You can do this. Probably you can if you're an energy wizard and you can start programming and you can start doing things manual. Probably, and you can do that already today. But that's not for the average end user. And what we are trying to do, and I think that's where Mercury comes in, is to make that possible for the average Joe down the street. And that's where I think the value is. Yeah.
And you see, I mean, for all of you, the value of the consumer being delivered without evolution of the regulatory framework or environment, typically on settlement data, the meter level of the house versus the device itself, flexibility, grid code terms being adapted to the IoT world and not only inherited from the industrial age of large CHP plants or assets. How do you look at the impact that we could have to deliver that value on the regulatory framework in your different markets?
So the UK is really interesting because there's been some grid code changes which look like they're going to have a really seismic impact. So one of them is P315, P4, and some of them sound quite arcane, which belies the big impact that they could have. And one of the impacts is that it's going to allow platforms who are not necessarily the retail energy supplier to directly provide flexibility to the end customer. And so Mercury and Kraken and the platform that this capability is going to be made available to lots of different parties, different suppliers who can then compete more effectively for the end customer. So we're really excited to see what's going to happen as these underlying regulatory changes sort of unlock with standardization like Mercury these benefits for the end customer.
Paul, we're going to obviously have a round panel or a panel on session on regulatory innovation. It's going to be great dialogue between US, UK, and Europe. I look forward to that, and Rob will do it later. But from your perspective, you know, we've been working on this first set of specs. What would be the outcome, the takeaway for policymakers out of the work that we've done, and especially the one coming on vehicle to grid, heat pumps, and the other classes of assets we're going to be covering going forward?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we'd all like regulatory alignment, and we'd all love to have a harmonized landscape. As an OEM, that, you know, our biggest challenge is meeting the needs of all of these different fragmented landscape. That's going to take a long time. We cannot wait for regulators and markets to become aligned. Customers are going to get very impatient if they have to wait another 10 years before they can access this stuff, which is realistically how long it's going to take for markets to align. So the opportunity here is that it allows us, it's like Mercury becomes a bridge where, despite the different regulatory regimes, the fantastic value in the work that's been done so far is you've taken out what is common across the regulatory landscape. You mentioned you'd looked at several thousand regimes and said, okay, well, regardless of the details of the rules, what does the device need to do to participate in this? Now, that's, as an OEM, this is fantastic because it allows us to make a device. We can't make a device that can do 4,000 different things in different countries. It's just not realistic. We don't have those kind of resources. But by distilling it down to a standard set of behaviors that will function in all of these different markets, whether it's the US or Australia or Germany or UK or Netherlands or whatever, that for an OEM really opens up those markets because we can produce these devices, we can get them certified under Mercury, and then the energy companies have the job of making it work within their regulatory regime. But that's okay. You know, that's what they do. That's their job. Our speciality is just churning out devices that work and are reliable and safe. Now, that is at odds when you're trying to do thousands of variants. It doesn't work that way. So this what it does is it unleashes OEMs like ourselves to go into multiple markets and still allow the customers within that market to benefit. So it's this bridging layer. We don't have to wait for regulatory harmonization, which let's face it is a big ask.
Patrick?
Yeah, exactly. I think the whole point is to move faster than regulators can do, and I think industries can do that if we have a consortium like this to actually come together and indeed, because we all have the same targets, if I can say, and I can only agree with what was said before by Paul, that the only thing we can't do is make a unit for every single market one by one. We could, but that's going to be quite expensive, and again, affordability will come into the question. The whole point here is how to make something which is available, which can run in the different markets, and which gives the certainty that it can be integrated. And I think essentially this is what this is about. And normally, I would think this can go faster, and it does go faster than what regulators can do. And regulators will possibly follow behind. But as an industry, we always have the possibilities to move faster if we can agree among each other. And that's the beauty, I think, of what Mercury is trying to do, is exactly to make that happen.
And just add something there. Regulation in abstract before the market exists is really, really difficult. We've seen plenty of very good regulators make mistakes where they think something is going to happen and the reality turns out otherwise and they have to change. It is much easier and faster in regulation to look at what is already working and codify that. Sure. And I'm kind of optimistic here that if Mercury is a leading force, then regulators will be able to say, well, we don't need to worry about this because it's already working, it's already proven, and we can codify this in our regulatory. So it means that the regulator actually implements stuff that's already out there rather than speculating about what might happen, which is very dangerous and very risky and very difficult. So I'm hoping we might actually influence and shape the regulatory landscape as well. I mean, that's being optimistic, but yeah, aim high.
It's definitely one of the tasks that we've undertaken with Nela of Next. Yeah, I don't know how many interviews we've made around the world, US, Europe, Asia, to try to find not what's different, but what's common. We had data scientists working on tons of data to try to produce something simple. Hopefully we are on the right path there. But then indeed we will need all of you guys to disseminate, discuss with regulators, because at the end of the day, the energy world is highly regulated, and we cannot do without regulators. We can move at a certain pace for some markets, but the other ones are indeed impacting the grid stability, the grid security, the grid resilience. So we cannot do without regulators. But I think we have a good material to go back and try to have that discussion, if they are open to do that, and focus on what's common, not what's different. Because that's always the answer we get all the time. Yeah, all grids are different. My stuff is different from the other country because I'm different. Yeah, okay, but what do you have in common? And I think that's an interesting lesson for the work that we've done on Mercury. We have found something which we believe is common, and common at the global level, which is quite a challenge, because obviously this market is highly fragmented. Maybe one question before we turn to the audience for Q&A session. We've had that already with the first panel, but if you had to make a recommendation to a colleague, a competitor, or another OEM that you guys know well in your life, what would you say to them for them to join basically Mercury?
Well, I'll get on the front foot because I think this is going to come very quickly. As I alluded to earlier, I think it's only going to take a few early adopters in a few markets to catalyze a broader groundswell. And I think Paul's point, his framing of, regulators like to codify what works is a really good one, because as soon as a few regulators say, oh yeah, this Mercury, we've got some concrete use cases, concrete consumer benefits that's based on existing standards, well, it could move very fast. And I think you don't want to get caught unawares as an OEM being with stranded assets that aren't able to unlock those benefits for customers through grid flexibility.
Yeah, there's a very good window of opportunity here, because the draft specification that's been put out isn't finished. It's very close, but it is still changeable, and there's still some things that need polishing, and that's fine. But that window will start to close once we start to certify devices, which, remind me, Serge, when that is. But once the certification process begins, that's when it'll start to be locked down. So between now and the beginning of the certification process, this is a great window of opportunity for OEMs to just get it exactly right. Because once we've certified the devices, that's it, we're running, and we're starting to do these things at scale.
Patrick?
Yeah, I would say the same thing here. The whole point is within HVAC, there are, as I was saying before, most of the companies have engaged in developing their own central controllers potentially, and they all have some kind of a bridge, open API type of thing to other systems in general, other systems. But I don't think there's anybody that can claim that we can control the whole energy system as such, and this is what this is about. What I'm trying to say to the other manufacturers is indeed, look, we can do an awful lot by ourselves, but we're a lot stronger if we can align and make sure that we also reach out to other sectors beyond the HVAC. And yes, you might have one or two people that can say, I can do this all by myself because I also have chargers and I also have PV and I also have this and that. But I would still try to challenge them, try to really find volume customers that will have everything from one supplier. And honestly speaking, that's a very, very, very small segment. So the importance is, I think, if we want to reach volumes and we want to make sure that heat pumps do become the next heating system in Europe, but also in the world, then I think this integration is the only way this will work. And Mercury, I think, is one of the ways, or potentially at this moment of time, the prime way of making sure that we can communicate across the sectors.
Thanks a lot. I will invite any question for the speakers.
Hi, we have another question from the live stream. Why does state of charge measurement make hot water control better for the grid?
Oh, great question. So a number of reasons. So one thing that we've learned through measuring state of charge across thousands of tanks throughout the UK is that people tend not to need much more than a fraction of the capacity of the tank. So analogous to what Paul was saying about EV chargers only needing, say, 17 kilowatt hours out of a 70 kilowatt hour capacity, hot water tanks is a similar story. So by knowing that, and knowing that for each individual household, you can create a great deal more headroom based on the set point, how you heat the system. So you liberate way more flexibility for the grid. So that's one answer. And the second answer is a little bit more technical, but it relates to heat pumps and heat transfer. So for various reasons, when you're heating a hot water cylinder, the state of charge that you begin heating matters to the efficiency of the heat pump. When a tank is nearly empty, it's more efficient to put the heat in because you've got less of a thermal barrier to accepting thermal energy from the heat pump. So it's getting a bit technical here, but it's very material, so you can easily get a 30-40% swing in efficiency depending on whether you're quickly reheating a hot water cylinder frequently from a very high state of charge versus allowing it to deplete to a comfortable level before reheating it with really good heat transfer. So those are two reasons, and the final reason is over time, as you build that sense of demand, you can then layer onto that the price of electricity so that you can determine when is the best time to heat whilst ensuring that you always have continuity of heat service for the hot water and the heating system.
Serge, let me quick one right here. It dawned on me, Pete, you talked about kind of the tipping point for Mercury, testing, certification, and labeling. A couple OEMs adopted, and hey, we'll get that tipping point. Taking a step further back, I'm struck, and maybe this is a North America perspective, the lack of consumer awareness around the benefits of some of the technologies that we're talking about. Heat pumps and heat pump water heaters specifically. I mean, EV chargers has maybe a different value proposition, but what are you proposing to do, or what are you doing to increase consumer awareness around the value proposition, the potential to participate in demand programs that will provide additional monetary streams for you to support energy costs? And then Patrick, you mentioned up front, hey, the cost could be higher, but the operating cost ultimately might be lower. What are you doing to create consumer awareness in that area?
A great question. So with our products, there is a user application that goes with the product. So when you commission it, when you first set it up as a householder, there's a connected touch point to that householder. Now, through that touch point, you can raise awareness of the availability of different energy propositions that are there. Now, that's great for existing householders. But some of the early adopters, they themselves become advocates, and they might go on Instagram and tweet about it. But really, a material player in our sector is the installer. So it's a lot about educating the installer, who is really the arbiter of what gets fitted. And so there are various different ways in which we're trying to think about how to engage installers through equally their installation app, which commissions the product. Can that provide them, for example, with a connectivity rebate, or can it provide them with the right collateral to make them aware of the different services from retail suppliers that are out there? One last point was, what really inspired us when we first started was when Octopus launched the Agile tariff in the UK. And that was an early adopter, sort of go negative, but it first of all made it clear to us, yes, we can quantify the value to people. Mercury is going a step further forward, because it means that no one has to think about it. It just happens behind the scenes. It's much simpler for an installer to communicate. It's just, install this, it will get the best out of your electricity tariff and save you money. And you don't have to geek out on the half-hourly price signal linked to the half-hourly balancing mechanism in the UK, for instance. That's all that complexity is abstracted away. But in terms of trying to communicate it, it's been hard in a sector where gas has been dominant. It's much cheaper. There's been quite a lot of negativity, but that's flipping now. That when you layer the efficiency of a heat pump plus the value of flexibility, it's now becoming demonstrably cheaper to run than the incumbent fossil fuel systems. So that's another tipping point we're going beyond.
Patrick, maybe you're a huge, strong consumer brand. What do you do?
Yeah, I can agree. The key point we have today is it's the installer. The installer is the first interface with the end user, and that's good and bad, because traditionally the installer is by far not an IT person. He's fitting pipes, he's fitting levers and things like that, but he's not at all programming stuff. And I think what we're trying to do more and more, I think all the manufacturers actually, is making sure that beyond what the installer can do, the customer can still come back to a platform where then the necessary things can be adjusted. And that's again where Mercury can then assist us in making sure that we can go beyond the unit itself, because what we now can do is potentially optimize the unit remotely. But if in theory later on we can actually make the interaction between the systems more optimized, I think that's where the real benefit can come from.
There was a question also here. Yep, sorry.
Oh, hi. Elta with the Ad Hoc Group. Really interested in what you all are doing. I think one of the things that can be cost prohibitive, I would say, in the US for flexibility programs is API fees. So how do you envision kind of that evolution with Mercury going into effect?
Well, as we were saying, we are standardizing the functional layer. We are not going to touch the business models of different players. What we need to secure as Mercury is the fact that if there is an API access to a device, there is no lock-in, there is a fail-safe. So if the vendor goes bust, which never happens obviously, but if you want to change an energy supplier, you are not locked in by the fact that you have access to your device via an API. So we are designing a fail-safe functionality description in Mercury. And definitely when we started the discussion with even EVSE OEMs, some of them being accessible only via those APIs. We had to tell them to step away for a while, maybe come back afterwards, when we start addressing the functionality of the implementation of those principles within cloud APIs. But we want to make sure that there is no locking situation. It should have an impact on fair pricing, but we don't want to prevent any business model. That's not our mandate, basically.
Personally, I think it will reduce costs. I think it's a really interesting point that you've had this kind of growth of these middleware players that are charging API access to like different devices, and then we've looked at it where we've been involved in some of these projects, and you add up the cost of each device per year, and quite quickly it can take up a big chunk of the savings associated with flexibility that's on the table. I actually think Mercury will make it quite transparent how things need to be done, and whilst it might not eliminate services that enable more seamless communication between, let's say, certain heating product vendors that are quite proprietary in the way that they communicate to the outside world, it's going to encourage many OEMs to actually directly work at the layer of Mercury themselves, because it will simplify that interface, and I think also it will avoid people having to reinvent the wheel in lots of different markets. So I think the answer is it will reduce that cost.
But
yeah, I think the absence of lock-in that is fundamental to being a Mercury certified device is crucial here. So that yes, you can connect your Mercury device to an expensive API if you want, but you can also connect it to another one that's cheaper. So I think that will allow the market to sort itself out. And clearly APIs do cost money to provide, and if you provide a really good one, then you can charge. But the key thing for us is that by buying our device, you're not locked into any particular back end. You can always move it somewhere else, and that's key.
Maybe one final precision or addition on this point of APIs. APIs are not evil. They don't represent necessarily a situation of locking or a misunderstanding that people have to own customers. No brand ever owns a customer. They own a customer experience, and they need to continue to deliver the experience that has to be in line with the value that they charge for some services. So if that's the way to do for via APIs, that's maybe the right thing to do. To the extent that there is no consumer locking, there is a fail-safe. We're going to work on EV APIs via the car OEM backends. There's no way to access the car charging and discharging without the car OEM backends. So let's not imagine that because it's an API, it has to be killed by Mercury. We will address it, but with the principles that we have set for all classes of devices. Maybe one final question before I invite the... Sure. Here.
Thank you very much. 30 years ago, you mentioned synchronizer. Ray Kurzweil wrote a book, Near to Singularity.
Singularity, yeah.
If you read the book 30 years ago, they would sound just like you guys today. Jack Welch, who created some of the EPRI, was also saying the same thing. And, it's the benefit, and that's going to drive Mercury in the way I look at it. And plus, you were just on the NASDAQ, so there's got to be some profits involved. So my question is, how does Mercury make their money? Which would be, to me, very interesting. And that, to me, is where the bottom line rolls.
So let me answer on the consortium side of the organization. We are a non-profit organization, so we don't have to make money. We have to fund our operations, obviously. That's why the membership fees are designed to cover the means that we need to deploy to achieve those goals, but we are a non-profit organization. From the members' point of view, we believe that there will be a lot of profit, efficiency, and additional revenue generated by the adoption of Mercury. So the business model for the members are indeed in the benefits that they will unlock by adopting those products, promoting them to their consumer, to their customers, and making sure that the overall grid system benefits from this also. So, but as an organization, we are non-profit. And does it answer your question? We'll
Something that came up earlier about APIs. I had a conversation as part of one of the Mercury groups with a heat pump manufacturer, and they said to me, we can't implement the Mercury API because our API is our USP. And I said, no, your USP is your physics, it's your compressor, it's your SCOP. That's what you're competing on. Customers don't buy your product because it has a great API. They buy your product because it's a great heat pump and because it can talk to other services. I think that's where Mercury is going to take us.
Thanks, Brian. May I invite the participants of the panel to make a final statement?
I mean, it's a really exciting time, I think. It's my core takeaway. I think there's clearly a groundswell of interest, and if we can get that above a catalyzing threshold for the whole market globally, you know, there's so much to play for here in terms of unlocking the decarbonization of grids globally with Mercury, and so it's a very, very exciting time and a privilege to be sharing this with everyone here.
Paul?
Yeah, it's a big milestone that this is now out in public. It's there to be criticised. It's there to be improved. So let the improvements begin. I'm going to be fascinated to hear what people have to say about this this draft, because the sooner it gets to the final version, the version 1, the better. Because our objective here is to get our devices certified, and we can't do that unless we've got a good standard to work on. So the next few months are crucial. Let's get this finished, and then the next big milestone will be the certification of the products, and can't come soon enough in our view.
Patrick?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, I would like to pick up with the last comment that was made, and I can only agree with that. The API, is that a new USP? I don't think so. It's really the technology inside, the compressor, the heat exchanger, the way we construct these things, which probably makes a difference. Finally, it's about how to make sure that the end user can take advantage of these technical differences, and that's the whole point. And I think that's where Mercury, and then especially the integration with all the other sectors and technologies that are involved in the house, are crucially important to actually unlock this potential. So I'm really looking forward to indeed making sure or working on the next use case, if that is heat pumps, and see how that pans out.
Thanks, Patrick. Would I just like to thank everyone for the interesting contribution, the questions. Devrim tends to talk a lot about the acceleration of history in technology cycles. And since we joined Mercury and launched it with April last year, I've got a feeling that we are accelerating a lot. It's both at times a marathon, it's a sprint, because we're doing a bit both in parallel. It is as chaotic as it should be, but I believe that it is the right time to do it. So please join us again. We need OEMs, we need utilities, we need policymakers, we need associations to relay the message and work on this harmonization that we're trying to build at functional level. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So lunch is going to be right next door. We'll resume at 1:30 with our utility panel. So look forward to the continued dialogue. Thank you.